Welcome to Access Point, the podcast where cybersecurity meets operational strategy in mission-critical environments. In each episode, we explore the access management, digital transformation, and technology trends shaping the future of identity security. Here now are your co-hosts, Chip Hughes, Chief Product Officer, and Joel Burleson-Davis, Chief Technology Officer at Imprivata.
So we just finished a great conversation with James Poulton, who's the SVP and GM of mobile computing at Zebra. And it was I think a really great conversation. We talked about a lot of things in ways that we normally don't. But what stood out to you, Chip?
A couple different things. One, I think, really good conversation. It's interesting. I hope it resonates with people because I know you and I talk to a lot of different hospital systems. We talk to a lot of different police officers, police stations, those sorts of things. And some of the stuff that we're talking about here is it almost feels obvious. It's like, hey, we have a new way for end users to interact. It's actually probably the majority of your users, these frontline workers. And so really just think about what we're saying. We think that there's a more cost-efficient way to solve some of these problems in a way that people are actually probably going to like better to do their jobs. And then at the end, we sort of touched on AI with him, which you and I, right before he came back on this, for those who don't know, we talk and then we come on and we record this. Everything they're talking about is stuff that we are talking about now in terms of, how we're going to move forward with AI, what's really going to scale, how does it apply to frontline workers? And I think we need more people thinking about this kind of stuff. So I found that really refreshing, not just talking about specifically what, Anthropic and OpenAI are doing, but how do we make this work so that we can have better compute on mobile devices at the edge on some of these pieces than we do today. So there's sort of two different parts of the conversation, but that's how I felt about it. How about yourself?
Yeah. I think very similar. It's interesting and useful grounding to say, hey, most of what people are talking about around AI and workforce efficiency and new technology, we're talking about the 10 or 20% of the world, but the other 80% of workers don't work like that. And so when we talk about technology adoption and new things to do, most of the conversation today is around the minority, not the majority of people's experience. And so really reframing that to talk about how can we make the majority of workers in the world sort of more efficient, more productive, I think was pretty valuable. It was pretty valuable grounding.
That's right. So I thought great conversation. I look forward to hearing feedback on it. But obviously Zebra is a great partners of ours, and we look forward to solving for that 80% that you just described. So hopefully that comes across as well, because I thought it was great.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, enjoy the conversation. Hopefully let us know and download, like, and subscribe. Thanks.
All right. Welcome back to Access Point. I'm your host, Joel Burleson-Davis. Joining me is Chip, as well as our guest, James Poulton. He's the SVP and GM of mobile computing at Zebra. Welcome, James.
Hey, guys. Nice to be here. Thanks.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about sort of the state of mobile computing in regulated industries?
Okay. Well, so I've been in the mobile computing business for a long time. I was on the consumer side for a while. For those of you who know anything about BlackBerries, it was I was with them for a long time but came over into the enterprise space when just before Zebra acquired Motorola back in 2014. So I've been here for quite a while. And what's really cool, I think when you think about our mission, which is really focused on frontline workers and, making sure that they're connected and productive and that they're more successful by us delivering them actionable insights at the edge where they're doing work. That really hasn't changed as kind of a mission statement for us. But what is really cool is technology is changing really quickly. So we're getting, we're adding new ways of doing that, including AI and some other things.
Yeah, that's great. One of the most interesting things, dealing with you all in Zebra is the reference to the mobile computers, right? They aren't mobile phones. You're in charge of mobile computing, and that's what we're sort of you guys are building.
Yeah, I think that it's more than a phone. right? I mean, the phone, it does carry a lot of that functionality. And I guess if you think about it too, if you really rewind the tape for when we started way back when, the smartphone wasn't a thing. And so, the idea that there was some sort of a corollary between like a smartphone and some of the things that a mobile computer does, wasn't really well established. So I think that really is stuck. But for us, I think it makes a lot of sense. And when I think about it, there's a stat that we use from time to time that, the frontline worker represents kind of globally about 80% of worker. Like if you think about worker types. And so, you think about, call it that other 20% that are, let's say, white collar workers, they're using computer, they have a whole set of technology that serves them. Many frontline workers are kind of underserved from a technology perspective, right? So, the opportunity for us to bring that to them in various varying degrees, right? Going from your paper pencil types to to people that are using our products, it's a really compelling opportunity.
That's awesome. What industries? So you sort of made that point. It's a pretty broad statement. Are there specific industries you're seeing the most adoption that you focus on more than others?
I think that we're very multi-industry. I mean, we're known obviously for retail. I would say that our footprint, is probably most mature and most advanced in retail. Obviously, transportation logistics, though, is another area that we focus on. And there's a lot of activity going on in that space now. I mean, is Amazon a transportation logistics company? Or are they a retailer? So there's a lot of overlap in those kind of use cases. Healthcare, which is a favorite of space of ours to cooperate in, I think is also high on the list. I mean, I think anybody who's been in a hospital, unfortunately, probably realizes there's some advancements that could be made there. There could be some improvements. And I think technology does a lot for that. Of course, manufacturing is a space that we're in as well. And then government. I mean, government is almost a representation of all verticals in some weird way. There's retail in government. There's obviously transportation, logistics, and warehousing. They even do manufacturing. And of course, they do healthcare. So, I mean, but just generally, those are the spaces that we play.
Yeah. And you said you've been around some time, right? And you're like talking about how technology makes things better. Like what are you really seeing? So like, as you've gone through time, like what is what's really driving sort of these underserved, markets or communities or populations of workers to adopt mobile technology?
It's always been about increasing efficiency, and what is efficiency and how you create efficiency, I think is the part that's changing. But I mean, we still hear from, as we survey our customers, we look at the market, we still hear that huge portions of workers at the front line really don't feel that they have the information, they don't have the data, they don't have what they need to kind of do their best work. And that could be serving customers, it could be serving patients, all of those kinds of, all of that parameter. So I think, that we continue to try to up the game for how much data we get to the front line. And now, of course, everybody talks about AI. I'm sure over the weekend, guys, you probably read umpteen articles on how it's
all day long,
the world, destroying the world all at once, right? So, but I think what's really fascinating about how we're looking at it is really using, the agentic side of AI to really complete work and help people do, just take steps out of the things that they do. And this is a really fascinating opportunity, but with that creates a whole bunch of challenges, security challenges, identity challenges. And so I think one of the things is just how important shoring up that is relative to some of the new capabilities we want to offer to our frontline workers.
So I want to have that conversation for sure. Can you give me an example use case of where you would see that agentic piece coming into play for a frontline worker? Maybe contextualize it just a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll give you one really interesting example. We won't name names, but who delivers packages. And when you think about the workflow that kind of starts inside of that vehicle to find the package, then they take the package, get it to the front of your house. They have to place it. They now need to capture proof that they've delivered the package. that they delivered it kind of intact, that they delivered it safely, that they delivered it on time, and then prove that where they delivered it. So that used to be a multi-step process of reading barcodes, taking pictures, those kinds of activities. If you throw in the fact that there's a lot of variability in that, what if I decide to take the picture and I'm in motion and I blur the picture? Well, if they have to look back on that picture for proof that the package was delivered, the quality of that image may not be sufficient. So what we did with this proof of delivery AI, it runs directly on the device, so it doesn't require any sort of cloud connectivity or token use, but it controls the entire experience to the level of the SLA that the customer kind of derives as being what's required. So rather than the associate or the driver taking the picture and deciding that it's in frame and the right amount of data is there, or not too much data, we don't want people, we don't want pets in the picture. The AI will actually make the determination of when there's a quality picture. It then takes the picture. It can also do a bunch of post-processing. If there was a dog, let's say in the picture, you can blur the dog. If there was a person standing at the front door, you can blur that person out of the image. And we do all of that without the worker having to make any sort of specific decisions. So if you think back on what's the ROI of that, well, first of all, you take multiple steps and make it one, right? It's just kind of one capture, gets all of the data you need. So there's an efficiency. And then if you look at the accuracy value proposition, if someone challenges me and says, hey, I didn't get my package, or my package was damaged when you brought it, or you left it not on my porch, you left it in the rain, or whatever the accusation is that drives claims. And these claims, of course, drive payments, right? Reimbursements very often. That's kind of the two-sided value proposition of this. So the efficiency and the proof of the delivery itself and the quality of that delivery. And so if you think about the idea of taking steps out of multiple workflows that you can probably imagine, and then proving that you did them really, really, really well with quality, you can apply that same set of technology to multiple use cases. And so that's an example for you.
Well, I think a great example. It's interesting too. And, obviously one of the things we think a lot about is where identity and access management fit into that. And I'd just be curious sort of your thoughts based on what you said, where you see these things coming together.
Well, I'll give you one, I think, really important nuance of what we do, right? So, Zebra devices, for the most part, Zebra devices that are deployed at a customer site are shared. So if you think about all of the access management, identity, and security that you drive kind of in your personal device, because it's yours and you maintain this relationship with this device, that relationship for our customers can change on a daily basis, right? When they go in for their shift, they pick up a new device. A new device to them. So that may not be the device they used the day before. So how do you start applying those best practices in an environment where that's all shifting, while though also making sure that you have the convenience of what you're used to on your own private phone? Because the minute that this becomes an arduous experience, the shared device, then people start cutting corners, and that's when you get kind of these bad behaviors that you try to protect us all from. So, you know what I'm saying? So I think that that's a critical part of why this is important.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things that across these. When you think about mobile computing, right? Like it breaks a lot of how people think about modern technology, right? You're not at a desk. You're not hitting necessarily cloud services or CAN. And you're operating instead of like one-to-one assigned devices, it's these shared devices, right? So you're talking about like having small AI running on device because you're needing to do that for like latency and cost and all sorts of things, shared identity, and like not in a particular location. And it's just such an interesting challenge. I think most people don't think about when we think of our modern technology world, right? But your other statement is that's actually like 80% of the workforce, how they like experience the world. That's just such an interesting, different frame of thinking.
Well, and what we see, because we spend a lot of time with our customers, I'm sure you guys do the exact same thing, and you go into the environments and you see what people do. And we see shared pins and we see unpassword protected devices just because, it just takes too long to type things in and, to kind of use these old, methodologies for entering your credentials. So, we spent a lot of time thinking through how do you bring, a more consumer-like experience, but in an environment where it's shared. So as in your personal phone, you store your credentials in that device, but it would be very impractical to do that at a large, grocer who's got tens of thousands of our devices and they're getting picked up by different people, which notwithstanding, remember too, that the turnover of workers in almost every industry at this point is also a challenge. So it's a really interesting one, but it's one that I think working together, we've come up with some pretty cool solutions.
And you sort of hit on a bunch of pieces there that I think is super interesting, right? It's like, hey, we've got this security thing that we've got to go deal with, which is we do want to make sure that it's the right person and that the right person is using the device. You've got the auditability of, you were talking about that example of, hey, I'm using AI to make sure that the picture that's being taken is correct. That's great. But also I want to make sure the person taking that picture still is the right person to be doing that and that I can track that back, I would assume, from a claim perspective. And I think, the last piece, it's still tying back to security, but at least that we think a lot about is, okay, this is all very happy path, but how do you deal with when things go wrong? When somebody forgets to check in a phone, when somebody leaves a phone, they go take a restroom break and they just leave it on their table and going and dealing with that and sort of solving those pieces together. And it's a totally different dynamic when I'm picking up a phone versus logging into, an endpoint that everybody can see or whatever that looks like, because they are mobile and it changes.
Yeah. Well, I think that, so we've created a suite of product that we call our Guardian Suite. And it does a couple of different things. One part of it is around, identity and access to the device. The other piece of this is about kind of device loss or device loss prevention. So there's a couple of different things that we do there. I mean, we instrument our devices such that we can see them on the network, and we provide, the ability for our customers to then identify a couple of things. One, does the device actually look like it's lost? Meaning, it's been assigned to Chip, and Chip's supposed to be doing work, but all of a sudden that device isn't doing work. It's not moving around. Do we think that maybe it's been put someplace, forgotten someplace? So we can actually proactively have another associate go and look for that device and help, recover that. If it ends up in a point where the device is lost for a period of time where then the battery dies, we've kind of created a model for that, such that we add additional BLE radio that can continue to beacon and show the whereabouts of that device. And I'll tell you that, we have some customers that literally lose, and this is a great annuity stream for someone who sells mobile computers. You'd say, why are you even trying to fix this? But sometimes they lose 20% of their devices a year. Like, it sounds insane. And by the way, these are people that have 100,000 plus devices deployed. So you can imagine how many that is. But, coming back on that, it's not just the ability to really track something, which is obviously incredibly important. But what's really amazing is about how authenticating who the person is and being able to identify who the user was creates this incredible accountability. And I think if you think about, your own phone, I don't know how many times you drop it on the concrete or run it over with your car, but it's probably not very many. But meanwhile, that kind of stuff's common in a shared device environment where maybe you don't care so much about it. This is just a tool. So that's the other side of things, is that we find that, the accountability creates a great value proposition for us and for the customer.
Yep. No, I think it's great. And I think, when I think about where this is going and what you've just described, one of the things we talk a lot about, ultimately, I'm just going to jump into healthcare, even though we're not talking specifically about healthcare. That is such a low margin business. And if you think about sort of 1% of phone loss that you can go help with, and making sure that you don't have some breach because you've got the right person on the other end, and the cost avoidance associated with that. The value proposition of this gets pretty overwhelming. And, I'd be curious sort of strategically your vision on some of this stuff, because one of the things I just very excited about, and I sort of sometimes scratch my head that I feel like I haven't seen more of it, is, we've got this shared use case we talked about. You've got the ability to go check out a device. And with some of your capabilities too that we've seen that you were talking about, you can now use that mobile computing device, and you don't need shared endpoints in hospitals anymore, right? If I'm a nurse, I can walk up and I can plug this in, or I think I've seen with y'all, you can literally walk up, detect the phone, and automatically, hey, I bring up a chart, I bring up that patient information, and it's just there. And it seems like it's sort of a win-win-win across the board. So you want to talk a little bit about strategically where you're going with that, what that looks like? It's one of the things I think it's kind of a no-brainer, like I said.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I think that, part of the first piece of this, which I think is fantastic, is when someone logs into a device and you know exactly who they are. Not only do you know who they are, but you can know what their needs are. So you can set a profile to say, hey, James needs larger font because he's aging very, very quickly. And James needs bigger font so that he can actually see. But when Chip takes that same device, you want it to be set for Chip. So there's that whole kind of convenience personalization side of this. The other piece of it, though, I think, which is when you think about from a security perspective and just, that kind of zero trust kind of side of things, you want to make sure that the person that has this, not only do you know who they are, but you really only give them access to the data that they're allowed to have, the data that they need to have for their work. So that's that kind of next piece that allows for that. Now, what you were describing, Chip, I think is this idea, and we have a product that we call Workstation Connect. We have now wireless Workstation Connect. And that's that idea that is, as a nurse, you've logged into your device. All of that credentialing is all now done, but you need, let's say, access to a more ergonomic workstation, because right now you want to move from the 6-inch screen to a large 27-inch monitor, which typically might be on a WOW, right? The workstation on wheels that we see kind of located in. So as that nurse approaches, there's a variety of different ways to make connection to that display and to that monitor. All of the compute is being driven from the mobile computer. All the credentialing kind of passes along with that. But now that nurse is able to use the keyboard, use the mouse, use the large display. And the beauty of this, and I think you'll appreciate this, is that when they leave that workstation, all of that, their data and all of their access and all of their permissions kind of move with them. So I could tell you also that it's much lower cost than a laptop or an actual desktop, which typically is what's running on those things today. And then if you think about a WOW as a battery powered machine, so very often they're not plugged in. So you want something that's very battery efficient. So using kind of these low powered, cradling systems that just, connect to the monitor, the keyboard, and the mouse is also super power efficient. So, but we are so excited about that concept. And when we see taking it and actually taking it even further than just a WOW, as patient rooms become smart rooms and there's more displays and bigger access to, to more consumption kind of tools, imagine how convenient that becomes for the caregiver. And, obviously, if the doctor comes in, that doctor probably has a different set of credentials and a different and a different profile. And what that person can do to assist and coach with the patient is also pretty fascinating. So I'm with you. I think it is almost an endless opportunity.
Well, it's the intersection of like everything that we care about, which is, I think it's super convenient. It just sort of makes sense. Yeah, I think of Minority Report from however long ago that was, but that idea you walk in and, we're not, this isn't a video podcast, so you can't see my hands, but we're not flipping screens with our fingers, but I'm walking in and the screen wakes up and I can probably get access to the data I need. But to your point, it's only the data I need. And then when I walk out of that room, it's gone. And that's exactly what we want. And then putting it in a cost efficient way, right? That this should cost a whole lot less because you're buying less hardware. You're not buying a machine for every single user and then having to have replacements. You're building a shared fleet and really making that operationally work.
Well, what's interesting too is, and we get told this from time to time. I mean, even just licenses, right? So a WOW that's a workstation is sitting there kind of as this licensed entity. Maybe it's got a Microsoft Workstation license or something like that. And so if you think about, the ability just to bring the credential, bring the profile, bring the license with you to that otherwise ambient thing, which is now just really about ergonomics. It's really compelling from an ROI.
Yeah, the dynamic where the usable thing is like the secure thing and the efficient thing. Like that's very much so the vision we're pushing at. And when you're out there with your customers in the field, how are people, resonating with some of that discussion, right? Are people butting on the the secure way is the easy way, or this is hyper cost efficient, or are they, hyper focused on the usability dynamics when you talk about sort of mobile computing in some of these industries?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of, especially in healthcare, it's really interesting. And I don't want to say that it's not in other verticals as well, but, making sure that the nurse has a good experience and a good working experience and that they can be as efficient as possible, because everybody knows how under, resourced nurses are just generally. So I think that, there's absolutely that side of it. I do think though that, the data and privacy is such a huge concern that it really becomes exciting when people realize there's no set of trade-offs that they need to make. You can be efficient, happy, well equipped to do what you need to do, and it doesn't come at the cost of putting privacy at risk or putting data at risk. I think that people are definitely resonating with that value proposition. By the way, with memory prices increases, I know that, recently I wasn't in this meeting, but, one of my colleagues was at a major hospital, and they were, kind of explaining exactly how costly laptops and desk, towers have become just because of the CPU and memory and cost increases that we're seeing kind of globally right now. So again, an opportunity to go to something that requires much less resource is just more cost effective, and at a time when, as you said, I think Chip, you said that kind of a low margin business, not a lot of dollars to be wasted. So,
yep, that's right. Two other things I wanted to hit on quickly with you, sort of switching areas, but it's really an implementation consideration. But then I think it affects very specific sort of industries, verticals. This idea of connectivity and being able to be on the network versus, I'm a police officer and now I'm driving in the middle of the desert because I have to for, we've all seen movies where bodies are dumped out there. I don't want to use that as the prime example, but, I'm in a spot now where maybe I don't have quite as much connectivity. How do y'all think about that and sort of operationalizing that and where that's going?
Well, we spend quite a bit of time thinking about our 5G strategy, and, we're on our about third generation, about to release kind of our third generation 5G strategy. With next generation chipsets, we're also starting to see that, satellite, high precision GPS, some of those kinds of technologies are coming along with those chipsets. And so we're definitely enabling those capabilities in our products to make sure that, on those occasions when someone is very remote, they have access to the kind of, to the network 100%. Historically, what we also did though, is not everything was necessarily mission critical or life critical, as because what you just described is kind of like it's very, but we still have people where the data is critical, and so we obviously have a variety of different methodologies of making sure that we kind of store data, and then once we can get connected back up, we can sync up with the database, and so some of it's a little bit less exciting than satellite and the ability to keep people connected in very, very remote areas, but we have a lot of users that are in that very scenario. Line workers, gas workers, they're out checking on gas lines, and solar panel technicians, and those ginormous windmill things. Like all of those people, all of those things need to be serviced.
Yep. No, it's right. I know we've done a lot of work trying to make those situations work too, just to be able to, how do you trust that a user's authenticating to the device? Because that security doesn't go away just because, for whatever reason, if you can't connect, making sure that those things work. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Last.
Sorry, I think, again, as much of like we try to do as much on device as we can. And I think that there's a lot to that. And I know you're familiar with, one of the ways that we've kind of solved for facial biometrics, just as an example, it doesn't require going to a cloud to retrieve, your facial biometric credentials. Like all of that can be stored in encrypted hash and a barcode. So if you think about, the ability to kind of bring with you a very, very secure login way. So even if you weren't connected to the network, you can still log into the device securely using what I think are really, really kind of smart, but simple ways,
Okay. Last topic, and then we'll let you go. But we hit on AI at the beginning, and we can't not sort of end on AI.
Yeah.
So, you talked about using sort of agents for some of the helping take that picture and that whole flow. I just would be curious, are you all thinking about sort of broader agentic identity and what that means in terms of what's on the device and how you're managing, if I have a personal agent on a device, what that looks like? I don't know necessarily if there's a specific question. Joel, you may be better asking a specific question on this, but I just am curious where that's going from your perspective, and if it changes anything mobile versus
and approach and perspective on the role of agents in the workforce as we move into this future, right? Your local agent, your cloud agents, your role of the humans, role of the these non-human actors. It's always really interesting, particularly because you talked about you're coming from a frame of reference that most aren't, right? They're not thinking about big cloud providers providing AI agents to people sitting in an office. So it'd be really interesting to hear how you see what the future of the agent worker looks like.
Yeah. So a couple things. I think one thing, that we think is interesting from kind of an agentic perspective is this notion of kind of the monitoring of the device. Right. So if you think about, just ensuring that the device is actually secure, monitoring kind of attestation, some of those kinds of things, then quickly translates or kind of transposes, I guess, into some device health. So how do we get a sense of the health and the state of the device? I think that those are really, really important. And then having the system, if you think agentically as being, it can actually take actions rather than the user having to take actions. Our users, the actual people with devices in their hands, our customers don't want them, pulling logs and doing, IT like work. So I think, there's a real opportunity for AI to help us with that. So we're really, really excited about that. I think the other piece of this, as I mentioned, we're really valuing doing as much on devices as humanly possible. And what's kind of interesting is if you start to think about, the challenge of a large language model, and Joel, you'd mentioned kind of a small language model as being something that could live on the device. What becomes, if you think domain specific, you start to really narrow down, what is the breadth of intelligence that a worker needs to have access to, right? So, if you are using ChatGPT, you can ask it any question and get any answer about anything, but that's not really what a mobile computer deployed in the hands of a worker is really intended for. So I think that, we see, and we're going to really stretch the bounds of what small language models can deliver, domain specific, to try to drive low latent, zero token cost kind of experiences on the device. But there's always going to be something more. And so I'm using a term these days that I'm kind of called scaling over, which is when you get a workload that can't be completed on the device, then we can go to someplace else. And that might end up being in the cloud, because some workloads may just need to be processed in that cloud. Now, that cloud could be public cloud. It could be like a local cloud or the customer's local cloud. So I think there's still a lot of opportunities to maintain, a low cost model in all of that. But that's just kind of generally how we're seeing the environment. And then remember too, not every one of our devices has the same amount of memory and the same amount of processing power. Many of our devices don't have GPU or MPU built into the chipset. So in order for those to participate in kind of these, in a model and an AI model perspective, they're going to have to reach out for help. And we could see, near edge AI being a really, really strong value proposition for that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a very similar dynamic. The models are just getting bigger and bigger and more expensive, more intelligent.
Yeah.
But when you think about implementing them in efficient and cost-effective ways, right? The domain-specific small language models are going to be, I think, some of the more interesting ways to differentiate for products and services and make them usable and efficient, rather than attempting to say, hey, your new Zebra phones are going to have 400 gigs of memory.
Exactly. Well, I really love that you guys have, just in this conversation, have kind of I think you resonated with the fact that, the who the AI companies are serving today, other than consumers. When you look at enterprise, they're serving that 20%. Right. So the 80% of people that are, the frontline workers, haven't really been getting their turn. It really hasn't been part of that, of where we're seeing, the industry go. So I do think that for companies like us, like both our companies, we have a lot of opportunity just because of who we serve and where our focus is. And I think that it's really, really exciting.
Couldn't agree more. Well, James, thank you so much for your time. That was my set of questions. Joel,
That's great. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. So look forward to continuing working with Zebra and James, and thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to have you back sometime soon.
Anytime. Thanks for the opportunity to chat. Been fun.
Wonderful.
Cheers. All right.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and follow Access Point on your favorite podcast platform. We also welcome your feedback. Please send us any thoughts, insights, or suggestion to accesspointpodcast@imprivata.com or find us on LinkedIn. Until next time, I'm Chip and he's Joel. This has been Access Point.